It was a Monday morning, one of those really cool ones, you know? Sofia Oliveira, just 14 years old, was on her way to a giant building, Banco Progresso. She was wearing her school uniform, a simple blouse, skirt, and shoes. And inside, a mix of nervousness and a lot of pride. It was the day of her first deposit at the bank, and she was going to do it alone. The check was for 5,000 dinars from a scholarship she had won for being a genius at studying. This money was proof of all her effort, but also a symbol of independence. She was determined to take care of everything without her parents' help. Sofia approached the cashier with the check in her hand, her heart beating 1,000 times a minute, and her briefcase with her documents tightly clutched. Behind the counter was the manager Beatriz Almeida, a woman in her early 40s, impeccably dressed and with a superior air. As soon as Sofia handed over the check, Beatriz's professional smile faltered. "A check for 5,000? Her voice rose a little, enough for the other customers to hear. "For a student your age, where did that come from?" Sofia felt her face heat up, but she quickly regained her composure. "It's my academic scholarship," she explained, a little trembling, handing over the award letter and her school ID. "I have all the documentation here." The cashier, a young man named Ricardo, took the check from her, his expression changing from neutral to suspicious. He even held the check up to the light, like a detective looking for clues. After a few seconds that seemed like an eternity, he turned to Beatriz, who was already observing everything with growing suspicion. Beatriz approached the counter, not even looking at Sofia. "We've had a lot of fake checks lately," she muttered, her tone full of contempt. "I'll need to check everything." Sofia's anxiety skyrocketed. She had expected a simple deposit, but now she was being treated like a criminal. She looked at her backpack and panicked. Her cell phone was in her school locker. "I need to call my mum," Sofia said, her voice cracking a little. "She's expecting me at home soon. I don't have my cell phone here." Beatriz barely looked at her. "That's not our problem," she replied, dry and cold. "You'll wait until we finish our check." The words hurt Sofia. She stood there, standing there, while Beatriz walked away, all arrogant. The bank manager went to a corner, crossed her arms with a smug look, watching Sofia standing in the middle of the busy room. Sofia's heart was pounding in her chest, and she felt exposed, as if the entire room was looking at her. Whispers began among the customers, some curious, others openly judging. She stood there for what seemed like an eternity, as the minutes ticked by and the humiliation only grew. Each second was torture, and the marble floor beneath her feet seemed to grow colder and colder. Despite the situation, Sofia's mind was on. She had always been very observant, noticing how people interacted, the subtle differences in treatment, how some were treated with deference and others ignored or left aside. She had noticed this before, but today she was feeling it firsthand. She wanted to scream, to demand that her documents be returned, but she kept silent. Her father had always taught her to stay calm in difficult times, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the way she was being treated had nothing to do with the validity of her scholarship, and everything to do with her appearance. Across the room, Sofia could hear Beatriz talking quietly to Ricardo, almost whispering. "I'm telling you, we need to maintain our standards here," Beatriz said. "We can't just let anyone come in and expect to be treated like they belong." Sofia's heart sank. The words hurt like a slap in the face. She was being judged, not for who she was, but for her appearance. Her hands clenched into fists, and she fought to keep her cool. She had worked hard for this scholarship, earned it on merit, fairly, and now it seemed like it was slipping through her fingers. She looked at the clock on the wall, and more time had passed. The whispers continued. The only thing she could do was wait. Sofia Oliveira was not an ordinary teenager. Even though she lived in one of the most upscale neighborhoods in the city, she always liked simplicity, nothing too fancy. The family home was elegant, but discreet, without ostentation, just well-decorated rooms and a strong sense of community. Sophia's mother, Dr. Helena Oliveira, was a well-known financial expert who ran one of the most respected firms in the country. As a woman who built her career from scratch, Helena taught Sophia to have a strong sense of independence and to believe that true success comes from effort, not privilege. The Oliveira family had plenty of money, but they didn't flaunt it. Dr. Helena believed in the power of education and hard work, and she always reminded Sophia that wealth wasn't just about accumulating money. It was about using that wealth for good. Sophia took these lessons to heart, excelled in her studies, and earned a full scholarship to Collegio Vertice, a prestigious school known for being very demanding. This didn't come easy, you know. Sophia worked tirelessly, earning the scholarship based on merit, not because of her mother's last name. Her friends often admired her ability to juggle studies, extracurricular activities, and a part-time job, but Sophia didn't mind. She enjoyed the challenge. It was her way of proving to herself and the world that she could succeed on her own. Her mother always supported her, of course, but she never let Sophia take shortcuts. "I want you to have the same opportunities as everyone else," Helena would say, "but I also want you to stand on your own 2 feet." Sophia's decision to take charge of the bank deposit on her own was another step toward independence. She was 14, but she felt ready to navigate the world as an adult. The scholarship check, the result of all her hard work, seemed like a symbol of the maturity she was gaining. That morning, before heading to the bank, Sophia carefully placed the check in her briefcase. Her mother was sitting at the breakfast table, reviewing some company reports, but she stopped to smile at Sophia. "Are you sure you don't want me to come with you?" Helena asked, her voice warm but tinged with concern. "I can handle it, Mom," Sophia replied with quiet confidence. "I'm 14 now. It's time for me to learn how to do it. On my own." Her mother nodded, her eyes full of pride. Helena knew Sophia was more than capable, but she still couldn't help but feel worried. It was a mother's instinct, the desire to protect her daughter from harm, especially when the world could be harsh and cruel at times. Sophia reassured her. "I'll be fine, I'll go in, make the deposit, and be back before you even finish your meeting." It seemed like such a simple task, right? Sophia never imagined that simply walking into a bank to deposit a scholarship check would lead to such a big situation. As she waited in the corner of the bank, Sophia couldn't stop thinking about the lessons her mother had taught her. She had always been raised to believe in fairness and equality, to treat people with respect and expect the same in return. But as she stood there, isolated and humiliated, she realized that the world didn't always follow the same rules. Sophia was forced to face the uncomfortable reality that her appearance, perhaps the color of her skin, was a factor in how she was being treated. It wasn't something she had fully understood before today. Growing up in her town, she had never experienced discrimination like this. Sure, she had heard about it, read about it in books, but it had always seemed so distant, so theoretical. Today, it was her reality. She glanced at the clock again, her anxiety growing. She had been waiting for too long. Her mind raced. Why hadn't anyone come to check on her? Why was she still standing in the corner when all she had done was bring a legitimate check to deposit? The longer she stood there, the more she felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her shoulders. Her mother would be expecting her home soon. She needed to call, but that too was denied her. Time passed slowly in the corner where Sophia stood, the weight of the situation crushing her. The marble floor felt cold beneath her feet, and the steady ticking of the clock on the wall seemed to amplify her growing sense of isolation. People came and went, but no one spoke to her. She was nothing more than an invisible figure, a source of silent judgment in the bustling heart of the bank. As Sophia stood there, her mind began to race. She glanced at the other customers, some of whom were being treated with obvious favoritism. A well-dressed elderly couple walked in, greeted with warmth and respect by Beatriz Almeida, who personally escorted them to a VIP area. Never before had Sophia received such recognition. It was as if she didn't belong in this space, this world of polished marble and mahogany wood. A few minutes later, a young man with a thick accent came up to the counter with paperwork in hand. Beatrice, who had been watching him from across the room, immediately waved him away with a dismissive gesture. "Sorry, the system is slow today. It will take a while to process your request," she said, her voice thick with indifference. Sophia watched, her stomach churning, as the man walked away, clearly frustrated. However, when a white couple walked in moments later with similar paperwork, Beatrice's demeanor changed completely. She practically smiled as she led them to the counter. "Sure, let me take care of that for you. Yes, right away," she said, her voice soft and eager. "You're in good hands here." Sophia's chest tightened with a mixture of anger and disbelief. This wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just poor customer service. It was something more sinister, something deeply rooted in prejudice. She knew exactly what was going on. Beatrice was choosing who to treat with respect, and she made it clear that Sophia didn't belong here. Her hands fisted at her sides as she forced herself to remain still, refusing to let her emotions spill over. She had seen this behavior before, subtle, insidious discrimination disguised as customer service. But never had she felt it so personally, so painfully. It was as if the entire bank had turned its back on her simply because of the color of her skin. Beatrice's voice cut through the air again, this time addressing the security guard standing next to Sophia. "Keep an eye on her," she instructed, her tone cold and authoritative. "Make sure she doesn't try to leave." Sophia's heart raced. She had to resist the urge to scream at the injustice of it all. Instead, she focused on her breathing, trying to stay calm, trying to block out the pain that threatened to overwhelm her. She had been taught to handle difficult situations with grace, but today everything felt different. Today she was trapped in a system that didn't see her as a person, but as an inconvenience. Minutes turned into nearly an hour. The only sound was the occasional rustle of paper, the distant murmur of polite conversation, and the sharp click of Beatrice's heels on the marble floor. Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that everyone in the bank was watching her, judging her. The murmurs grew louder, more frequent. Sophia could hear snatches of conversation, snide comments, whispers of pity, and the occasional barely concealed chuckle. She felt small. She felt helpless. The worst part? She wasn't sure if anyone cared. No one came to her defense. No one stepped in to question why she was being treated this way. It was as if her suffering was invisible to them, just part of the background noise of a world that had learned to ignore injustice. Then, just as Sophia's mind was beginning to buckle under the weight of the situation, something caught her attention. Beatrice was speaking to Ricardo, the cashier, in hushed tones, her face tight with frustration. "Why is she still here?" Beatrice asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to get rid of her. Make sure she knows she's not welcome." Sophia's stomach churned. She'd heard enough. Beatrice's words confirmed what she'd feared all along. This wasn't just about a misplaced check or a minor mistake. It was about something much darker. It was about power, control, and the assumption that people like Sophia didn't belong in spaces like this. She was an outsider, an inconvenience, a problem to be solved. When Beatrice turned around, Sophia couldn't help herself and spoke up. "I'm not a problem," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I'm here because I won the scholarship. I'm here to deposit my check like everyone else." Beatrice didn't even glance in her direction. Instead, she turned to the security guard, his voice low and commanding. "Take her to the back. Keep her there until we're done with the paperwork." The security guard, a large, intimidating man, approached Sophia without hesitation. His hand gripped her arm tightly, and he began marching her across the bank's lobby. Every eye in the room turned to watch, but no one intervened. Sophia felt the blood rush to her face as she was forcibly escorted away from the teller counter, her heart racing with a mixture of anger and humiliation. "Stay here," the guard ordered, positioning her in a corner near the back of the room, where she was visible to everyone but out of the way. He stepped back, his eyes sweeping the room, making sure she stayed where she was. Sophia stood there, her arms crossed over her chest, her back straight and her head held high, but inside she was falling apart. As Sophia stood in the corner, her body aching from hours of forced immobility, her thoughts began to swirl. The harsh reality of the situation weighed heavily on her. She had been humiliated, treated like an outcast, in a place where she had expected to be treated fairly. Each minute that passed seemed to drag on forever, and the longer she was forced to wait, the more she realized that something was deeply wrong. Sophia's eyes darted around the bank, searching for something, anything that might offer a distraction from the overwhelming sense of injustice. Her gaze fell on manager Beatriz Almeida, who was circling the room, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. She was speaking to a tall, imposing, well-dressed man whom Sophia didn't recognize at first, but something about his demeanor seemed familiar. He was someone important, and judging by the way Beatrice spoke to him, he was someone she was eager to please. The man's name rang in Sophia's mind like a bell: Armando Queiroz. Her mother had mentioned the name before in passing when discussing business rivalries. Armando Queiroz was the CEO of Grupo Financiero Meridional, one of the biggest competitors of the bank Sophia's mother had recently acquired. Sophia's pulse quickened as she watched the exchange between Beatrice and Queiroz. She wasn't close enough to hear the conversation clearly, but she could tell it was serious. Beatrice leaned toward Queiroz, her voice dropping to a whisper as she handed him a manila folder. Sophia's heart skipped a beat as she watched the exchange. The folder was clearly marked confidential, and though she couldn't make out the contents, it was obvious that whatever was inside was important. Sophia's mind was racing. She had watched her mother work for years, building the bank's trust and reputation, and she knew that any breach of trust could be potentially catastrophic. This wasn't just a business meeting, it was something more, a betrayal in progress. She shifted slightly in her corner, straining to hear more, but her position was far from ideal. Still, she kept her eyes fixed on the two figures. Queiroz nodded as he looked at the folder, his expression serious, even pleased. He said something to Beatrice, his words too low to be understood, but the smile that spread across her face told Sophia all she needed to know. Beatrice was not just helping Queiroz, she was actively working against her own company, her own employer. Sophia's stomach churned. It was becoming clearer by the second. Beatrice wasn't just mistreating her because of her race or age, she was using her position at the bank to sabotage it. Sophia had no idea what was in that folder, but she knew it wasn't good, and she knew it had something to do with her mother's company. She felt a sudden surge of determination. No longer just a passive observer, Sophia knew she had to act. She wasn't just there to deposit a check. She had stumbled upon something much bigger, something that could affect her mother's life and career. She couldn't just stand by. Her eyes darted to the small leather-bound notebook she always carried with her. She had taken notes during her time at the bank, recording the discriminatory treatment she had witnessed, but this was different. This was critical. She had to document everything she saw, every detail, every whisper. Sophia had no idea what she would do with the information, but she knew she had to keep a record. She had to be prepared. As Beatrice and Queiroz continued their hushed conversation, Sophia quickly opened her notebook, her fingers trembling as she wrote. She wrote down the time, the names, and the suspicious folder, everything she had observed in those few moments. Their conversation ended abruptly when Queiroz stood to leave. Beatrice shook his hand with a smile, her demeanor almost too eager. Sophia's heart pounded as Queiroz walked past her toward the exit, his steps heavy with purpose. As soon as he was gone, Beatrice returned to her usual position behind the counter, but her smile was gone. She was focused, her attention now fully on Sophia, who remained standing in the corner. Sophia felt a shiver run down her spine. It was as if Beatrice knew she had witnessed the whole thing. Sophia's thoughts were racing. She had seen enough to know that something sinister was going on behind the scenes. But what could she do with this information? How could she prove what had happened? Her fingers tightened around the pen in her hand, her resolve firming. She had been wronged, yes, but now she had the chance to make things right. Not just for herself, but for her mother, her family, and everyone else who had been treated unfairly by Beatriz Almeida. Sophia would not let this go. Sophia remained silent as the weight of the situation weighed down on her. Hours of waiting, hours of humiliation had culminated in this moment. She had been wronged, treated as if she didn't belong, but now she had something far more valuable than her check or her documents. She had the truth, and it was time to make that truth known. As if summoned by her thoughts, the bank doors opened and her mother, Helena Oliveira, walked in. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. Helena's presence was magnetic. She was calm, composed, and impeccably dressed, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding in the bank. Beatriz Almeida, who was overseeing Sophia's approval, straightened as soon as she saw Helena. "Dr. Oliveira," Beatriz greeted, her voice dripping with false politeness. "I wasn't expecting you today. How can I help you?" But Helena didn't respond with kindness. She turned immediately to Sophia, her eyes narrowing as she saw her daughter standing alone, still isolated in the corner. A flash of anger crossed Helena's face before she masked it with an outward calm. "Sophia, are you okay?" she asked, her voice thick with concern. Sophia nodded, struggling to keep her emotions in check. "I'm fine, Mom," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts inside her. "But there's something you need to know." Sophia took out her leather-bound notebook and began to recount everything she had observed during her time at the bank. The preferential treatment given to white clients, the cold indifference shown to her, and most importantly, the conversation between Beatriz and Armando Queiroz. She read aloud from her notes, her voice unwavering as she recounted the suspicious meeting and the file marked confidential. Helena listened intently, her face hardening with each word. When Sophia finished, Helena turned to Beatriz, her gaze sharp. "Mrs. Almeida," Helena said, her tone icy, "I believe you owe my daughter an apology, and I believe you owe me an explanation." Beatriz's confident facade began to crack. "I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, but Helena cut her off. "I know exactly what you've been doing," Helena replied, her voice controlled but firm. "You have been colluding with Armando Queiroz, handing over confidential information to a competitor. This is not just a case of poor customer service, this is corporate espionage." The bank fell silent. No one moved. Sophia watched as Beatriz's face went pale, her composure crumbling under the weight of Helena's words. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but she couldn't find the words. Helena didn't give her a chance. "You are fired, Ms. Almeida," she said. "Effective immediately." The words rang out with a finality that seemed to echo throughout the bank. Security was called, and the same burly guard who had earlier escorted Sophia to the corner now moved toward Beatriz. "Please escort Ms. Almeida out," Helena instructed. As Beatriz was led away, her pride utterly shattered, Helena turned back to the room. "This institution will undergo a complete overhaul," Helena said, the commanding voice. "We will implement changes to ensure that no one is treated with the same disrespect that my daughter was today. No one." The room was still silent. Sophia's heart was pounding in her chest as she watched her mother take control of the situation, her strength a pillar that Sophia had always admired. The following months were a whirlwind of change for the bank. The investigation into Beatrice's actions uncovered not only her attempts to sabotage Helena's business, but also a pattern of discriminatory behavior. The bank's leadership was revamped, and a new training program on fair and equitable banking practices was implemented. Sophia's experience became a turning point not only for the bank, but for her as well. She was invited to speak at Colegio Vertice, where she shared her story with other students. Sophia used her voice to advocate for financial education and the importance of equality in all spaces. In front of her peers, she smiled, knowing that her painful experience had shaped her into someone who could advocate for others. She had turned her moment of humiliation into a platform for change, and her mother's example taught her that, even in the face of injustice, it was possible to make a difference.